Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, AFR Talk, second hour of this Monday edition of Focal Point on the American Family Radio Talk Network. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. Program is Focal Point. This is the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. Have Morgan on the line from Memphis, Tennessee. Morgan is mobile, so he's in his car. Appreciate you calling, Morgan. I appreciate you waiting over the news break. We were talking about creation, evolution, and the difference between those two theories of origins. And we both agreed that what you ought to do is you have a model of origins, one that's a creationist model, the other which is an evolutionary model. You put them side by side, and then you look at what we know to be true scientifically. And then you compare what we know to be true scientifically up against these two models and ask yourself the question, which of them makes the best sense? So we're in agreement up to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are.
All right. Keep going.
So you mentioned that consensus really has no part in science, and that's another point of disagreement for me. I studied natural science when I was in college. I had a lot of experience talking to many geneticists and biologists, and I've been teaching science here in the Arkansas Delta for a couple years now. And I have to say, consensus is almost certainly a part of science. It's just not, it's a component rather than something that makes up the entire thing of science.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say that consensus ever ought to be decisive, would you, Morgan? Because if you go back to the first part of the 20th century, you had people like Margaret Sanger and people like Adolf Hitler. They believed that the colored races were genetically, hereditarily inferior. President Woodrow Wilson believed that. We had a lot of public policy experiments that were set up based on the supposed inferiority of the races to the white man. There was an enormous consensus in the American people. We had a lot of involuntary sterilization that was based on this consensus. Let me finish, and you can talk. We had involuntary sterilization programs that were based on this consensus that the colored races were genetically inferior. So you're not going to sit there and tell me that consensus ought to outrule what we know to be true scientifically, are you?
I want to go back and kind of define consensus a little bit more narrowly, because instead of talking about a consensus broadly, we have to talk about a scientific consensus. And science can't really make value statements. Science can't say that things are better or worse than other things. Science
Correct.
Can only make very factual claims based on whatever model the evidence seems to be pointing at that time.
Correct.
Adolf Hitler was not a scientist. Singer, I believe, was a scientist, if I'm thinking of the right Singer here. But people, and there have been many cases where you have politicians and scientists and radio talk show hosts, I'm just kidding with you, but people misusing the science to point out their own individual agendas.
Okay, Morgan,
may not be scientific.
Let me run through some stuff with you. Let's take these two models, creation, evolution. Okay. Let's lay them side by side. Let's look at what we know to be true scientifically. We know, for instance, number one, that neither matter nor energy can be either created or destroyed, correct?
Yes.
And that's not a theory, that's a scientific fact.
That's scientific law.
That's a law in science. All right. Now, Morgan, you just lost your whole argument right there by agreeing with that scientific principle. Because if what scientists are saying as a matter of scientific law is that there is absolutely nothing in the universe, inside this closed system, there is nothing that can explain either the origin of matter or energy. It can neither be created nor destroyed. They have absolutely no explanation by their own admission for the creation of matter and energy. So what does that tell us rationally, logically, Morgan? We are compelled, if we're not being blinded by some kind of politically correct consensus, it tells us that someone outside the universe had to put that stuff in here. That's the only place it can come from, is outside this closed system we call the universe. That's inescapable to me.
Well, I want to backtrack a little bit there, because what you just said reminded me of something I was reading about earlier in the school year. There's this wonderful book. It's called Big Bang by a man named Simon Singh, and he's a science writer, and he wrote this fantastic book about all of this stuff. And what you just pointed out is really the difference between what used to be called a static universe model, where we thought the scientific consensus in the beginning of the 20th century was that the universe has always been the way that it has been because we know energy and matter cannot be created or destroyed.
No, Morgan, that's impossible. The universe could not.
I know.
No.
So then the Big Bang Theory.
So you're admitting.
The Big Bang Theory kind of
hold it. Let me just interject here. So what you're saying is that scientists now agree that the universe has not always existed. It's not eternal. Matter is not eternal.
It gets a little bit tricky because whenever you're talking about time.
Morgan, hold on. It cannot be eternal because of the second law of thermodynamics. We are headed toward entropy. Somebody wound up the universe. It's now winding down. That's a scientific law. We're not heading toward increasing complexity. We're heading toward increasing randomness and disorder. Evolution says we are heading toward increasing complexity. The second law of thermodynamics, which agrees with the biblical account, says that we are heading toward increasing randomness and chaos. So you take the second law of thermodynamics, just like the first law, it fits with the model of creation. Now go back and finish what you were saying about this Big Bang Theory.
Okay, so the universe as a whole, from what we can tell, is definitely going along with the second law of thermodynamics,
Correct.
Increasing entropy.
Correct.
And by talking about the second law and increasing entropy, it recalls the idea of the beginning of the universe,
Correct.
When everything was condensed into a very, very dense form.
Whoa.
One of the highest order, and one of the most highest, very, very ordered state is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, but Morgan, you just lost the argument. Where did that incredibly dense ball of stuff come from? I'm not going to spot you that. Where did it come from?
Where did it come from?
Yeah, this thing that was there at the beginning, this highly ordered, highly complex, dense ball of whatever it was, energy or matter, that exploded into the universe. Where did that come from?
That's a really good question.
Absolutely, it's a good question.
That's I'm sure scientists are following along with. I was reading a book about
Morgan,
string
let me interject again. So what you're admitting is that science has no explanation for where that original ball of stuff came from. But you would have to admit that creation scientists do. Let's assume for the sake of argument that theory is correct. I don't buy it, but let's assume for the sake of argument it is. We've got an answer. God put it there. Scientists don't have an answer.
But that answer that you give is not based on empirical evidence, sir. It's based on a book.
No. I'm agreeing with you that we take the two models and put them side by side because we can't prove either evolution or creation. We're not going to be able to prove it because nobody was there other than God when everything came into being. Nobody was there. We can't reproduce
Science is not about proving things. It's about supporting and weakening ideas. It's not about proving anything.
Well, absolutely. But what I'm saying, Morgan, what I'm saying is in our conversation right here, and we haven't even talked about genetics, we haven't even talked about the fossil record, you've already indicated that the theory of evolution has got serious problems with the first law and the second law of thermodynamics, and creation science is perfectly consistent with those two laws. Now, in my mind, if you're a rational, objective thinking person, that leads you toward creation science.
We know that life is a very rare thing.
All right, Morgan, I'm sorry. We are out of time. I got to let you go. Focal Point AFR Talk. Back in 2.